Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, July 20th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, you can expect a high of 85.5 degrees Fahrenheit, with the evening bringing a low of 66.3 degrees. It's shaping up to be a comfortable day, perfect for enjoying some fresh air. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll be diving deep into the recent actions in Washington, exploring why Congress made the decision to approve significant budget cuts to public media organizations. What drove these choices, and what could be the long-term impact? We'll also turn our attention to workplace safety here in California, investigating why CalOSHA has been reportedly skipping critical inspections and what that means for employees across the state. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a significant development out of Washington, D.C., where Congress has given its final nod to a massive federal funding rescissions package. This bill, initiated by the White House, is now just awaiting President Trump's signature. For more on what this means for the country, we turn to our reporter Ethan. Ethan, this sounds like a pretty big deal. What exactly is this package all about?
Grace, it certainly is a big deal, and one that hasn't been seen in decades. We are talking about approximately a $9 billion federal funding rescissions package, formerly known as the Rescissions Act of 2025, or H.R. 4. According to reporting from GNN's The Log-Off newsletter and GoVexec.com, this marks the first time in many decades that a rescissions package of this scale has successfully passed both chambers of Congress. Think of it as Congress taking back previously approved but unspent funds.
$9 billion is quite a sum. Where exactly are these cuts being targeted?
The package aims its razor-sharp focus primarily in two areas. First, a substantial $1.1 billion reduction is set for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB. Then, there's close to $8 billion in cuts earmarked for various foreign aid programs.
Let's start with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Public broadcasting, including NPR and PBS, has been a staple for many American households. What's the impact of these specific cuts?
The cuts to public media are indeed significant. That $1.1 billion reduction to the CPB represents the full federal funding due to them for the next 2 budget years. This impacts their federal funding from October 2025 through September 2027. As Y.org and KTVB.com have reported, the CPB is the primary funding source for over 1,500 local public radio and television stations nationwide, which includes National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service. So this isn't just about the big networks. It trickles down to your local station.
Why are these cuts being made? What's the argument from the White House and proponents of the bill?
Proponents, including the White House and many Republican critics, argue that public media outlets like NPR and PBS produce, quote, biased reporting, quote, unquote, leftist propaganda, quote, viewing their federal funding as a, quote, misuse of taxpayer dollars, quote, according to Y.org and PBS.org. Jonathan Turley, an opinion contributor writing for AOL with original reporting from The Hill on July 19, 2025, asserted that the, quote, era of the American state media will technically come to an end, quote, with the, quote, final elimination of public funding for national public radio. Quote, he highlighted long-standing controversies over NPR's perceived bias, even criticizing NPR CEO Catherine Maher for denying bias and for her, quote, glaring and overt bias. Quote, Turley specifically referenced former senior editor Yuri Berliner's observation that NPR's Washington headquarters had 87 registered Democrats and 0 Republicans among its editors, which ultimately led to Berliner's resignation.
That's a strong ideological stand. But are these cuts truly just about perceived bias, or is there a broader impact?
Grace, a wealth of evidence suggests the impact extends far beyond just political bias. Many argue these cuts disproportionately harm essential, non-ideological public services like emergency alerts and local news, particularly in rural and often conservative-leaning communities, where market-based alternatives are frequently unfeasible. As detailed by the Washington Post on July 19, 2025, and various sources compiled by protectmypublicmedia.org and publicmediaalliance.org, public media stations, especially smaller ones in rural areas, are disproportionately affected due to their heavy reliance on federal funds. For instance, KYUK in Bethel, Alaska, depends on federal funding for 70% of its budget, serving as often the, quote, only place to get local news and information, quote, and emergency alerts, including broadcasting in indigenous languages like Central Yupik.
So these stations are more than just news outlets. They're vital community lifelines, especially during emergencies.
Exactly. Public media stations are a critical component of the nation's emergency alert system and FEMA's integrated public alert and warning system, providing life-saving information during disasters when internet, cell phone, or cable services fail. The Washington Post cited a recent 7.3 magnitude earthquake near Sandpoint, Alaska, where KUCB in Unalaska was the first to broadcast tsunami warnings, highlighting the vital role of these stations. NPR President and CEO Catherine Maher warned that defunding poses, quote, a real risk to the public safety of the country, quote, as reported by CBS News. FEMA has even awarded CPB grants for its next-generation warning system to upgrade infrastructure in rural and tribal areas, according to CPB.org. These cuts could indeed have very real public safety consequences, a rather grave prognosis for many communities.
That paints a very different picture. And what about the foreign aid portion of the cuts?
On the foreign aid front, approximately $8 billion are slated for withdrawal. Specific programs targeted include those for emergency shelter, water, and sanitation, family reunification for refugees at $800 million, food, water, and health care for countries affected by natural disasters and conflicts at $496 million, and initiatives to boost economies and democratic institutions in developing nations at $4.15 billion. Notably, an initial proposal included a $400 million reduction to the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, a global health program. However, due to pushback from Senate Republicans, this specific cut was removed from the final Senate bill, as reported by GNNHD.TV and Y.org. Democrats have argued that these cuts to foreign aid would harm America's global standing and create opportunities for countries like China to increase their influence, according to Politico.com.
That's a comprehensive look at the what. Can you walk us through how this bill navigated the legislative labyrinth to reach the president's desk?
The legislative journey was quite the marathon, Grace. The Senate approved the package with a 51-48 vote in the early hours of Thursday, July 17, 2025, which was just 3 days ago. Vice President J.D. Vance cast tie-breaking votes during earlier procedural hurdles, a true nail-biter of a process. Notably, Republican Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska broke ranks to vote against the bill alongside Democrats. Senator Murkowski specifically cited the, quote, incredible public service, quote, stations provide in Alaska, as reported by the Washington Post. Despite efforts by Senators Collins and Murkowski to restore most of the CPB funding, these attempts failed, though negotiations did lead to a plan to continue directly funding 28 public radio stations serving Native American communities through a Department of Interior program, a move met with skepticism by Native Public Media President Loris Taylor, according to the Washington Post and Y.org. The U.S. House of Representatives then gave final approval to the package on July 18, 2025, just 2 days ago, by a vote of 216 to 213, with most Republicans supporting and all but 2 Democrats opposing, according to PBS.org and WJCT.org.
And now, it's on to the president. What's the expectation there, and how are both sides framing these significant cuts?
Following House passage, the bill was sent to President Donald Trump's desk for signature, who is widely expected to sign it into law, as appnews.com and devx.com have reported. Senate Majority Leader John Thune of South Dakota framed the cuts as a, quote, small but important step for fiscal sanity, quote, and an effort to rein in government spending, according to Y.org. However, critics like Marcia Porter Norton, a county commissioner in Colorado, argued in the Washington Post that these cuts, amounting to a negligible 0.03% offset of a larger reconciliation bill, are driven by ideology rather than genuine fiscal necessity, risking invaluable public services in vulnerable communities. The White House has also indicated that this might not be the last rescissions request, according to govexec.com, suggesting this might be just the first cut of many.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this very complex, yet critical, story for us. We appreciate your insights.
My pleasure, Grace.
Up next, we'll dive into our second top story of the morning. Welcome back. For our second story this morning, we're delving into a critical issue affecting millions of workers right here in California, the severe understaffing of CalOSHA, the state agency responsible for ensuring workplace safety. We have reporter Chloe with us to shed some light on this concerning situation. Chloe, what's the latest on CalOSHA's capacity to protect workers?
Grace, it's a really pressing issue, and the situation is quite dire. According to recent reporting from Cal Matters, published just yesterday, July 19th, Cal/OSHA, which stands for California's Division of Occupational Safety and Health, is facing a severe understaffing crisis. Nearly a third of its inspector positions are currently vacant. This isn't just a number. It translates directly to a compromised ability to keep our workplaces safe.
A third of positions vacant? That's an astonishing figure. What does that mean for how the agency operates, especially when it comes to responding to incidents?
It means they're often forced to skip vital in-person worksite inspections, even in serious cases where workers have been injured. A new state audit, also referenced in July 2025 reports, confirmed CalOSHA's overall vacancy rate was 32% in the last fiscal year, which is significantly higher than the state government's average of 20%. For field compliance inspectors, it was even worse, approaching 39% as of February 2024. Some district offices like San Bernardino, San Francisco, and Santa Ana were facing truly dire shortages, with vacancy rates upwards of 64% as of April 2024.
So if they're not conducting on-site inspections, how are they handling worker complaints and accident reports? Are there specific numbers on how many incidents are going uninspected?
Absolutely, Grace. The data from the audit is quite revealing. In the fiscal year 2023 to 2024 alone, CalOSHA received reports of 3,360 accidents that did not receive an on-site inspection, compared to only 2,459 that did. An audit of 60 case files from recent fiscal years found that CalOSHA often lacked sufficient evidence-backed reasons for closing complaints and accident reports without in-person visits. In 9 of 30 uninspected complaints reviewed, the rationale didn't even meet CalOSHA's own policy standards. Even when policies were followed in opting against a visit, factors like worker injury or observable hazards suggested an on-site inspection would have been much more beneficial for worker safety.
That's incredibly concerning. And what about the inspections they too managed to conduct? Are those at least timely?
Unfortunately, not always. For formal, serious complaints, the average time to initiate an inspection was 12.54 working days, which is substantially over their negotiated target of 3 working days. Non-serious complaints fared even worse, averaging 20.53 calendar days past the 14-day target. Some cases have taken weeks or even months to begin, despite state law requiring certain complaints to commence within 3 working days. This lag is a huge problem because it prolongs worker exposure to hazards.
It sounds like a systemic issue that's been brewing for a while. Is this a new problem, or has it been ongoing?
This isn't a new development at all, Grace. It's been a chronic issue, recognized for many years. The number of inspectors has actually been steadily decreasing since fiscal year 2011. To put it in perspective, According to reporting from CalMatters, as of January 2024, California had roughly one inspector per 118,000 workers. That's far less protective than Washington State, which has 1 per 27,000, or Oregon with 1 per 26,000. California's own ratio was better back in 2018, at 1 inspector per 87,926 workers.
So fewer inspections, slower responses, and fewer boots on the ground. What's the real-world impact on California's nearly 19 million workers?
The repercussions are severe, Grace. Workers are left highly vulnerable to unsafe conditions and irresponsible employers, because the agency's capacity to protect them is severely crippled. It undermines CalOSHA's deterrent effect, meaning employers might face minimal consequences for endangering health and safety. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that between 2020 and 2022, over 450 California workers died on the job each year, a stark backdrop to CalOSHA's reduced capacity. It truly shows that safety is not just an ideal, but a matter of life and death.
You also mentioned that CalOSHA's enforcement personnel haven't consistently documented effective reviews of employers' injury and illness prevention programs, or IIPPs. Could you explain what those are and why they're so crucial?
Of course. IIPPs are legally mandated programs, required since 1991, that outline how employers will identify and control workplace hazards, investigate accidents, and train employees. They're meant to be the first line of defense. The absence of an IIPP is actually the most frequently cited CalOSHA violation, year after year. For example, in 2022, IIPP violations accounted for 30% of all citations. The problem, as highlighted by the California State Auditor's Office, is that CalOSHA often focuses on what they call, quote, paper compliance, quote, meaning they cite employers just for not having a written program, rather than for failing to actually implement its specific, more impactful elements like hazard surveying or employee training. Research shows that citing these specific, proactive elements is what truly prevents injuries, leading to a fall in injury rates by more than 20% after an inspection. Just citing for a lack of a written plan has no clear impact on injury rates. It's truly a paperwork shuffle rather than a safety shuffle.
That makes a lot of sense. So, what is Governor Newsom and the California legislature doing to address this long-standing crisis?
Grace, they have taken and proposed several actions. A state audit published just 2 days ago on July 18th confirmed that despite these efforts, process deficiencies and staffing shortages remain key concerns. However, the Department of Industrial Relations, which oversees CalOSHA, reported an increase in staffing levels, with CalOSHA's overall vacancy rate reportedly decreasing from over 30% to 12% as of May 31, 2025. A statewide recruitment campaign is underway, and Governor Newsom just announced Jennifer Osborne as the new director of the Department of Industrial Relations 3 days ago, on July 17th.
That sounds like a step in the right direction. Are there any other specific legislative or budgetary efforts?
Yes, in March 2024, Governor Newsom's office stated that CalOSHA's operations were bolstered by over $92 million to hire and retain staff, with nearly $50 million specifically allocated to boost enforcement. On the legislative front, the Workplace Violence Prevention Law, SB 553, mandated employer prevention plans by July 1, 2024, and CalOSHA rulemaking for that is required by December 2025, which is about 5 months away. An indoor heat prevention rule became effective last year, on July 23, 2024, for indoor work environments reaching 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Also, effective July 1st of this year, SB 1350 extended state workplace safety and health laws to cover domestic workers employed by companies. Just recently, on May 7th, CalOSHA released a draft proposal to revise both outdoor and indoor heat illness prevention regulations, with public comments due by July 7th, which was 13 days ago.
It sounds like a lot of moving parts. There's a debate about whether it's more effective to increase staffing or reform the agency's inspection methodology, particularly regarding these IPPs. What's the general consensus on that?
That's a really crucial point, Grace. Evidence suggests both are crucial and complementary. While increased staffing is fundamental to enable more inspections, research, including that from the University of California, Davis, strongly points to the highly effective impact of reforming IRAP enforcement to focus on the implementation in times of those specific, proactive measures, rather than just the existence of a written plan. Given that IIPP violations are the most frequently cited, a more effective approach to these common violations could yield substantial safety improvements. However, the severe understaffing cripples the agency's ability to conduct timely, thorough, and proactive inspections in the first place. Even with an improved methodology, insufficient inspectors mean fewer workplaces will benefit from any inspection. So it's not an either-or situation, but rather an interdependent. One, increased staffing would enable more inspections, and a refined methodology would ensure those inspections are more impactful in preventing injuries. It's a dual challenge that needs a dual solution.
Chloe, that's a comprehensive look at a very complex and vital issue for California's workforce. Thank you for that detailed report. We appreciate you shining a light on this.
My pleasure, Grace.
And that's all for our morning segment. Stay tuned for more local and national news right after the break. U.S. teenagers are increasingly using AI companions, with a new study revealing nearly 3/4 have engaged with them. Over half use them multiple times monthly, primarily for entertainment and curiosity, though about a third seek social interaction, from conversation practice to emotional support. Despite this, 80% still prefer human friends, finding AI chats less satisfying, yet a third find AI conversations equally or more fulfilling. Red flags include roughly half of teens not trusting AI advice and an AI literacy gap where younger teens are more trusting. A third have discussed serious matters with AI, and a quarter have shared personal information. Common Sense Media warns these companions are designed for emotional connections, posing risks for developing adolescent brains. They urge strong safeguards and legislation to restrict minors, citing lessons from social media. Concerns also persist about data privacy, mental health risks like unhealthy attachments, and exposure to inappropriate content. In Japan, critical elections for the House of Councilors tested Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and his ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Ishiba, who took office last September, faces an uphill battle after his coalition lost its lower house majority last October. Public dissatisfaction over rising commodity prices, stagnant wages, and Social Security concerns fueled this electoral crunch. Opinion polls suggested Ishiba's coalition might struggle to secure the 50 seats needed, potentially leading to an unprecedented minority government in both chambers since World War II. A poor showing could prompt calls for his resignation. Immigration has also become a heated issue, with smaller right-wing parties advocating stricter measures, pushing, quote, silent invasion rhetoric. Opposition parties propose tax cuts and increased welfare spending. Should the ruling coalition lose its majority, Japan could face increased political instability, potentially impacting investor confidence. The opioid crisis remains a national issue. Reports indicate the Trump administration is reportedly withholding or delaying approximately $140 million in federal funding for fentanyl overdose prevention, specifically the Overdose Data to Action OD2A program. This occurs despite the Trump administration allocating billions to combat the opioid epidemic during its term, including the Bipartisan Support Act. Public health officials express concern over this abrupt funding shift, stating verbal commitments are insufficient. Senator Tim Kaine criticized the alleged withholding, linking it to broader tax cuts. Some drug policy experts worry that a renewed focus on criminal penalties for fentanyl traffickers, alongside potential Medicaid cuts, might shift attention from crucial addiction healthcare programs. Tragic news comes from Gaza, where the Holy Family Catholic Church compound was struck by Israeli shelling on July 17. The incident resulted in 3 deaths and 10 injuries, including the parish priest, Father Gabriel Romanelli. This church, the only Catholic one in the Gaza Strip, had sheltered approximately 600 displaced individuals, many of them children. Among the deceased were the 60-year-old janitor and an 84-year-old woman. Top church leaders from Jerusalem made a rare visit to express solidarity. The Israeli military stated, an initial assessment indicated fragments from a shell mistakenly hit the church, expressing regret for unintentional damage. Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni criticized Israel's unacceptable attacks on civilians, and Pope Leo XVI renewed his call for an immediate ceasefire. This is not the first holy site impacted. The Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrius was also damaged in 2023, and again in 2024. A UN commission reports over half of all religious and cultural sites in Gaza have been damaged, destroyed. Finally, the California cannabis industry had high hopes for a potential future Trump administration, but those hopes might have gone up in smoke. Federal immigration raids recently targeted licensed cannabis farms in California, notably Glass House Farms, on July 10th. While state legal, federal authorities like ICE and DHS swooped in, claiming the raids were primarily for immigration enforcement and illegal labor, not cannabis violations. Over 360 people were arrested, and tragically, one farm worker died after falling from a greenhouse roof. The company denies knowingly hiring undocumented workers, while Governor Gavin Newsom slammed the raids as a militarized stunt, accusing President Trump of using immigrant labor as a political weapon. This highlights a significant disconnect. While Trump's previous administration largely took a, quote, hands-off approach to state legal cannabis, these raids underscore the industry's vulnerability to federal intervention, particularly concerning its workforce. It seems for California's cannabis companies, their hopes of an ally in the White House have been severely raided. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.